Thank you, Marissa, and thank you all for joining us today for Writers Beyond Borders. My name is Surabhi Kaushik. I am a fiction writer. I also dabble in nonfiction and poetry a little bit, but I also call myself a literary artist, which means I put together, and bring people together in programs like this. Because one of my goals, apart from being a writer, is to build and strengthen and nourish writing communities. And this is my way of doing it. So welcome everyone once again. And thank you, Priya, for being with us today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest for today, who's Priya Doraswamy. Priya Doraswamy's love for books, people, and background in law makes her career as a literary agent the perfect fit for her passions and talents. Priya works with publishers and writers worldwide. Although physically in New Jersey, her work hours are zone free. She is drawn to all genre of fiction and nonfiction. Prior to her agency career, she was a practicing lawyer in New Jersey. Originally from Bangalore, India, Priya immigrated to the New York area many moons ago. She founded Lotus Lane Literary in May 2013. And Priya, it's over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, Surabhi, for having me. And thank you to the library for having me on this session. Hello, everyone. I guess you all can see me, but I can't see you. And anyway, I hope I hope we have an interactive session this morning. As Surabhi said, I'm a literary agent. And I'm going to sort of dive in right away and sort of tell you what I do. And please feel free to fire those questions away as and when things pop up. So in the United States and the United Kingdom, you need a literary agent to submit your work to publishers. You can't really send your work directly to publishers. So, well, I guess that's good news for publishers and agents, but not so good news for writers out here. However, in other parts of the world, things are done differently. So if you're, let's say, in India or Africa or other parts of the world, you can still send your work directly to publishers. So what is it that I do? At a very basic, fundamental level, I am the intermediary between the writer and a publisher. So my client is a writer, and I take on my writer's work and I query publishers, and with the hope that we will get a contract for publication. And that's just a very simplistic view of it. I would say most literary agents obviously go above and beyond that. I can talk for myself when I say, when I take on a book, and I usually do mostly debut writers. So there is quite substantial amount of work that needs to be done sometimes. And so I work with writers on substantive edits. I don't do copy editing and line editing because that's just not my expertise. But I do provide sort of a very detailed structural plot, feedback and edits. And so sometimes it could take up to 6-8 months or even a year by the time my writer and I are ready to submit to editors. Of course, that's not always the case. There are times when I get a manuscript that's very polished and I'm ready to go out to submissions right away. So it really depends on where the work is at and how comfortable and confident I am to take the work out. So what does it mean to query a literary agent? In the United States, there are several literary agents who do, all sorts of books, fiction, nonfiction. Some are specialists, some are generalists. I'm a generalist agent because I do fiction and nonfiction. I really don't represent children's writing. So there are specific agents who do that. And so what I think I could do is sort of run you through how to query an agent and at what point, should you be ready to query an agent? So if you're writing fiction, the absolute rule of thumb is you need to have the fully finished manuscript, and it has to be a final manuscript. Do not send work that's still in drafts. You have to send your best work out. So you have your manuscript, it's written, it's reviewed, you're feeling really good, and you're ready to submit. What next? My recommendation is to really do research before you send it out, because as an agent, I receive multiple queries daily. And as you can imagine, it's hard to sort of sift through everything, and also for you to get attention if your work is not really great. But how do you find, where to query? One way to do it is obviously Google. I know it sounds kind of banal, but you can get a lot of information through Google, just to say, what agents fit my work, and, depending on the genre that you do. The other way to do it is obviously, I assume all writers are fantastic readers. So over the years, when you've read books and when you've pretty much come to the last page, you'll see an acknowledgements page. And if you've loved a book and you think, okay, I sort of see my book like this book, make a note of the name of the agent and the publishing house, because most writers will always acknowledgement by agent and editor. I think that is a good way to read. The next best way is to sort of go on agents' websites and see, what they're representing, what kind of books they've published, and then that's also a really good way to also figure out, whether this agent is a fit for you or not. Sometimes you might go on a literary agent's website and not particularly see, maybe the genre that you're writing in, and that's fine. If you like what the agent represents, surely go ahead and query. So, for instance, I really had not taken on any horror writers until 2 years ago, only because I just could not find a really great horror book. And I didn't really advertise that I am taking horror writers. But then I had this horror writer query me, loved his work, and now I have 2. So, sometimes it's good to take a chance. So having said that, once you have, like I said, once you're ready to query and once you have your list, make sure that your queries are addressed correctly, but more importantly, make sure that you're following submission guidelines. So what is that? Every literary agent will have a submissions guidelines on their page. Please, please, please follow those submissions to a T. Every agent is different. Every agent requires different information. Some agents require 50 pages. Some agents do not want you to send them material until, your query letter is sent and they ask for it. So really just be very careful about what agents want and how they'd like to be queried. So once you send your query out, for me, it's 2 weeks. It's on my website. I clearly sort of say, if this book is something I'm interested in, I will get back to you in 2 weeks. And if I don't get back to you in 2 weeks, it means it's not for me. I do look at every query that comes my way. So that's something that I do personally, because the world of books is very subjective, and I need to know, whether I can take this book on, or if there's something very particular that interests me and I think that I can work with the writer on. So, the process is, I ask for a specific amount of information. You send it. I read it. I really like it. I write back saying, I'd like to see a full manuscript. And then you send me the manuscript, and then I will read it. And here, sometimes it might take me maybe a month and a half to get back to you, but I will always be in contact with you, because I don't require exclusive submissions. So what that means is, you can send out your book to as many agents as you want. But when I do ask for a full manuscript, I request that the writer keeps me posted on whether, the writer has got other interest or other offers. And if I do like the full manuscript, then I will call the writer and have a conversation with them, depending on whether I see, it might need work or whatever it is. And I want to make sure that we're both on the same page. Once we decide to work together, we will, be very hands-on. I'm a very hands-on agent, so I will make sure that we're talking regularly and we're really trying to get the book to its best possible version. And then I will make a list of publishing houses and editors that I will reach out to, and I sort of keep the writer informed at all times about, where the book's at and what I'm doing. I like a very collaborative approach, and I also always let my writers know where things are, who the editors are that are considering, and it's a very open dialogue between me and the writer. Once I submit, the best news obviously is to receive an offer or multiple offers, and once that happens, then the writer and I discuss, very sort of substantially, if there are multiple offers, where we want to go. I set up interviews with the publishing editors, and then we sort of take it from there. And once the book does get a deal, which is really lovely, it usually takes 12 to 18 months here in the United States and the UK to get a book published. So from the signing of the contract to publication date, it's about 12 to 18 months. But the work of an agent and the writers obviously never ends, because once the commissioning editor takes on the book, she or he has a round of edits, or they have a round of edits, and then we all work back and forth. The book is scheduled for publication, and once all of the substantive edits, the copy edits, the line edits are done, it goes into their art department, which is always so fun. We talk about covers. And then, at that time, we're talking about blurbs, eliciting blurbs from other writers, all that fun stuff. And then about 2 or 3 months before the release of the book, the PR and marketing team from the publishing company gets involved. And that's where they sort of really start going out and building the platform for the book. And then once the book is published, obviously, we have a 3-month window. So the writer and the publishing, marketing and PR executives work really hard to get the book out there and into the world. So that's pretty much the process in a nutshell of like 5 minutes. But Surabhi, if there are any questions at this moment, or if you have any specific questions to ask, we can certainly address them.
There is a question, but I'm going to ask you if you want to add anything before we go into the Q&A. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just, look, it is for all you writers out there. I know, it's sort of daunting, and only because it's, you sort of hear and read all these sort of stories about how hard it is to get into publishing or to get a book published. And while that is true, ultimately it is your craft. And I don't think all that noise should really bother you, because, if you're a writer, you write. And if you have belief in your work and you really feel strongly about it, you will do everything it takes to get your work seen by a literary agent and hopefully eventually get published. So I would say don't sort of, give into all of the noise that you hear about publishing.
All right. Okay, so I am going to go into Q&A after a group picture. So because I like to typically take a group picture before we go into the Q&A. And Larry, I think you're trying to unmute. You will have to put your questions in the chat, because this is a recorded program. We are not letting participants unmute. Sorry about that. So Marissa, if you can give us a count on 3, and whoever is comfortable to share, to switch on your cameras. If you don't want to, that's perfectly okay. You don't have to. Please tell us when we have to pause, Marissa.
All right. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to take the picture. I'm going to give everyone a few more seconds to flip the camera on if they want. All right. 1, 2, 3. Make sure I got it.
All right.
All right, we're all good.
Thank you guys for posing. Okay, I do see a few questions. Priya, are you able to see the questions or do you want me to read it?
You know, I see our transcription of chat, but I thought I would see the questions. I don't. So do you mind reading?
You are breaking up for us a little bit. Is it only me or?
No, I did. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can find the chat. Okay, I see it. Oh, I do see it. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Sudha, for your wishes. Okay, I see a question from Shanaz. She says, am I assuming that you take on books that are not done or a book that has not gone through a professional editor? Okay, so let me answer that question. Shanaz, so for fiction, the manuscript has to be complete, but for nonfiction, it does not have to be complete. It is on a proposal basis. So that's the significant difference between a work of fiction and nonfiction. Your next question is, or a book that has not gone through a professional editor? Yeah, I mean, I do take on, like I said, I work a lot with debut writers. So I take on books that are not professionally edited, but if a writer has the resources to get a really good professional editor, I would highly recommend it, because the world of publishing is becoming smaller and there are not that many editors, and they have fewer editors, more books, and same with agents. So if you really want to have your best shot at having an agent pick up your work, I would say that's a great way to go. But obviously, you have to have the means to do it. Do you ever send back comments? Sorry, I'm reading your next question. I only send back comments if I've agreed to take on the writer and we're working on the book. Once in a way I might, but mostly I don't do that anymore. I hope that answers all my questions, Shahnaz. Megha says, thank you for putting it so simply. You're very welcome, Megha. Okay, and now Sudha says, are you partial to specific genre? What are your thoughts on short story collections and novellas? Great questions. I am not partial to specific genre. I am a generalist agent. So, it really depends on the seasons. Like right now, my fiction list is a lot stronger than my nonfiction list, but it really depends on what comes my way. Short story collections and novellas, while those are really hard to sell, novellas especially, I recommend to all debut writers to start off with a novel, a long form novel first, and then once they've developed their platform, to then offer short story collections. Novellas are near impossible to sell. So I would, unless you're a horror writer, and that's a whole different genre, but in general, novellas are very hard to sell in the United States and the United Kingdom. I hope that answers your question, Sudha. I'm sorry, I'm trying to. Okay, Megha says, do you take on books from India too? Yes, I do. I do take on books from India. Okay, Shanaz asks, what about memoir? Is it considered nonfiction and not need to be finished? Shanaz, that is correct. Memoir is considered nonfiction because it is about your life. So memoirs can be submitted on a proposal basis. Sarah asks, do you have any advice for a writer who is published in one genre and is looking to pivot to another? That's a really good question, Sarah. So it really depends on what the writer is writing. It's hard for me to sort of answer that question in a vacuum, but I would say I'm not averse to it as an agent, but I would say to that writer, really develop your platform. So for example, if let's say you're writing cozy crime and all of a sudden you want to pivot to historical fiction, I think it's fine. You just really need to be very strategic about how you do that. And Sarah, feel free to drop in more questions, if you want me to elaborate a little more on that. Manjusha says, great intro. Thank you. Question, do we need to work with an agent in our country only? I'm not sure where you are, Manjusha. If you're in India, I don't think you particularly need an agent, although now I know that a lot of Indian publishers are preferring agented queries. But if you're living, either in the UK or the United States, then you absolutely need an agent. Did I get everybody's questions? I'm just sort of...
Yeah, you did. You did great. I had a follow-up question, which I'd asked you earlier also. So if an author has, what about audiobooks? Do you take those on? Like if you already have a published book and I want to get it into audio, or I want to pitch it for OTT, what happens? Do you take on projects like that?
Yeah, okay, so great questions. So audio and OTT are two completely different beasts. Sure, yes, why not? Audio, there are some absolutely fantastic audiobook publishers, and as you may or may not know, the audiobook publishing scene has exploded in the last couple of years. It is growing exponentially, and so absolutely. Most likely, if an author is reaching out to me to ask if I represent audio rights, it could be that they are self-published. And honestly, it depends on the book. Everything starts from the book. So, the ideal situation would be if they're self-published, they have very good, sales figures, and obviously the story works, and it'll be great as on an audio platform. Then why not? I'm always happy to consider that. On the OTT space, which is film and TV rights, just a caveat: not all agents do book and TV rights. I do all of those rights, but there are specialist film and TV agents that do it. The approach is very different, obviously, for book adaptations. So, that's a whole other sort of session, I would say. But again, it really depends on how successful your book is. So let's say your book is either self-published or it's been published by a traditional publisher, and the writer is seeking an agent to do their film TV rights. Absolutely. I mean, yes, you can totally query me. I do represent film and TV rights, and I do have contacts, within Hollywood. And I also do some, obviously with Bollywood, because I do Indian writing as well. And I also have contacts in the UK. So it all depends on the book. That's the genesis of everything.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful, because often self-published authors are discouraged and only traditionally published authors are taken. So it's good to know that it doesn't matter, which way you're published, and you can just your stories has to be strong.
Absolutely. And, because of the explosion of streaming and the OTT platform, I know for a fact producers are hungry for IP, especially books. So, it's not like the old days where they're very snobbish about, we will only take on books that are on the New York Times bestseller list, which was true, by the way, because, 6 years ago, that was the case. Now it's different. Like, I'm a solo agent sitting out in a little cave in New Jersey. Let me tell you, I've been getting a lot of queries from big producers and studios because everybody's hungry for great stories, right? There's a big appetite and for new stories. And people are tired of the same old. So, don't be discouraged. I mean, absolutely, be bold and send out your queries.
Okay, there's a ton of questions in here. Let me know if you need help navigating, or can you see them?
Okay, I'm going to go back to the chats. Okay, here we are. Where did I? Okay, I see Shana says, when you query publishers, do you query everyone or do you have favorites? Do you query top 5? Is there a specific way to do that? Really good question, Shanaz. I go on a book by book basis. It really depends. Sometimes the strategy is to blanket it to maybe 25, 30 different editors in all of these publishing houses. Sometimes it could be an exclusive where I'll say, oh my gosh, I know this editor is totally looking for a book like this. I'm only going to send it to her. Let's see what she says. We'll give her maybe a couple of weeks exclusive. Sometimes I might query top 5. For me, it really, like I said, it's very case by case. So the strategies vary. Manjusha asks, what makes a query stand out for you? Oh my gosh, a question which all literary agents are always scared to answer because it really depends. And it's such a sort of a vague answer, Manjusha, sorry about that. But, for me, obviously, I mean, we all know books are subjective, right? So it has to really resonate. So for me, what is it? Well, the plot has to be really good. I obviously like great writing. And, really it's a hard question for me to answer. I can talk specifically about the query letter. I like simple and straightforward query letters, only because it just, directs me to the book in question. I would recommend not trying to be funny in a query letter. It's only because we don't know who you are, and you might be a genuinely humorous person, but sometimes humor is very tricky, and that can put some agents off. So I would say a really simple, clear query letter with a couple of paragraphs, telling me about your work and a short bio about yourself. Obviously the query letter has to have a synopsis of the book. I would say keep it in present tense, try to stay away from adjectives, just really, tell me what the book is about. And those kinds of queries always attract me. Larry asks, what length is most popular? Larry, if you could clarify what you're specifically asking about, I can, answer that question for you. Shahnaz asks, what stories from cultures, races, religions are Asians hungry for, or does it not matter? Shahnaz, it really does not matter, but I think, there is a big push in diversity in publishing. So we're looking for stories from diverse and underrepresented writers. So I hope that answers that question. So that says, I have an indie published novel with an expired contract. The publisher is sort of in hiatus. How can I give it a new life since I believe the story has merit? So you're going to have to chase down your publisher to make sure that you have the rights back first before you do anything else. And once you have your rights back, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to say it's going to be a little bit of an uphill task for you. My recommendation is if you are or have written a second novel, then I would recommend that you go out on a query with that second novel, and then you can always, present the backlist, i.e. this novel. But just make sure that the contract, it says you have an expired contract. So I don't know. I mean, I can't really talk about that. You have to really figure out what that contract says. And you have to make sure that there's no first option on that contract as well. So I think for you, the best route is if you have another book to start with that as give yourself a fresh start. Christopher asks, do you know any agents who will accept? Well, Christopher, I would recommend that you, so there are a lot of sources that you can use to find a list of agents. Writer's Digest has a wonderful list. If you go to the AALA website, there is a list of quite an exhaustive list of agents. That's very good. A lot of different publishers have books with or directories with agents, and you can certainly look into that. Shahnaz asks, what stories topics have been overdone? Shahnaz, every story and topic has been overdone. Sorry to be the bearer of that news. That saying, there is no such thing as a news story. Well, it's true. There is no such thing as a news story. It all depends on how you tell it. Larry qualified by saying he's asking about fiction. Is there a favorite page length? Yes, great question. Usually for commercial fiction, and there's a slight difference between commercial fiction and literary fiction. And for both, so for commercial and literary fiction, I would say anywhere between 70 to about 100,000 is really good. I would say the real sweet spot is between 70 to maybe 85,000. For literary fiction, you can go up to 100,000 words. But remember, Larry, it's always good to write more and then sort of whittle down, because it's very hard to, let's say you've written a novel of 55,000 words. That won't be considered a novel length in the United States. And I think it'll be really hard. And I know it is hard for writers to sort of write up from that. So you really have to have that sort of inverted triangle and just sort of write more, and then you can edit down. So, if your first draft is 110,000 words, that's fine. My advice to all writers is don't worry about word count and page length when you're writing your first draft. Just go out there and do it. And then you obviously are going to go back and things are going to change. But ultimately your final draft, if it's hitting anywhere between, like I said, 70, 75 to about 85, 90, or even 100,000 in literary fiction, it's a good word count. Shanaz asks, what is the difference between commercial and literary fiction? Honestly, it's, it's a sort of, the easiest example I can give you is, Emily Henry's books are, I would say, considered commercial fiction. You might have seen Beach Read and, the likes of that. And literary fiction is, Salman Rushdie. So that's the fastest example I can sort of give you. Okay, did I answer everybody's questions?
I think yes. I'm just typing your website in. So, okay. I put it in the chat. That is her website, Priya's website. You can go in there and, like she said, be sure to check out the submission guidelines really carefully. I actually read them out loud because that's something I do, because I tend to miss stuff if I'm just reading, to myself. So go ahead and that's going to be there in your thank you email as well. Okay, Shahnaz has more questions.
Yes, that's a very good question, Shahnaz. So publishing sort of works on a school schedule. What I mean by that is the summer months are pretty much quiet and really dead in publishing, although that has changed. I know there's always, exceptions to the rule, but typically I like to query between September and the middle of October. And then again, from the first week of January into the end of May, because that's when I feel like publishing is on term, if you know what I mean. Usually publishing shuts down towards the end of October into early November up until the new year, because it's Thanksgiving and Christmas, and usually publishers are off that whole week of Christmas, and then they're back and ready to, get on with new work starting around January 5th or so, up until, I would say, towards early, I don't normally send submissions out after May 20th, and I just wait till September, unless, of course, I know that a editor wants to see the work sometime in the summer. The reason I do this is because we need the full team on board, because they need a whole team to make a decision about the book. It's not just the editor that I send the book to. Most of book publishing today is really sort of run by the marketing PR teams, because, as we all know, it's so hard to get attention on a book. So typically they have a team of about at least 5 to 15 people who decide the fate of a book. Surabhi, did I answer that?
You did. She has a follow-up question, and she says, is that the same timeline for authors querying you?
Yeah, good question. So I tend to slow down too a little bit in the summer. I typically don't like to get queries in August because usually I'm reading my my own clients' new work. A lot of my writers are serious writers and they're prolific. And so, they're also producing a lot of work. There have been times when I have closed my submissions for I would say last year, I think I'd nearly closed it for a year only because I just had a lot going on. So be mindful of that too. When you are looking at websites, if an agent says queries are closed, please do not send her or them or her or him a query when submissions are closed, because they're not going to read it. You have no advantage. In fact, it's a disadvantage of sending it. And B, it sort of signals to the agent that you're not a good rule follower, and it's important to just really understand and appreciate certain sort of expectations, because ultimately the agent and the writer have to work long term, and there will be frustrating days, long days. And so the writer and the agent have to have a very good understanding of the relationship. So if you are not really sort of listening to what the agent is trying to say, then it's a red flag for an agent. So be mindful of what the agent is seeking or not seeking at a particular time. So I know some agents will say, not looking for, let's say horror at this, for the next 6 months. Don't send your work if it's horror. Just wait, because she might resume 6 months later and it's only 6 months. I mean, I know writers take 10 years to write their first book, right? And that's absolutely normal. And so why blow your chances because you can't wait another 6 months? So yeah, so that's. Any other questions in this chat?
Yes.
I'm going to.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so Vidya asked, do book releases follow a school schedule too? Are there times in the year that are more favorable?
Oh, great question, Vidya. Not particularly, because, well, yes, I mean, there are favorable times. So October is a big time for book publishing. Some of the big titles, you'll observe it. You'll see some really big writers coming out in October. Early summer is a very good time, especially if it's that sort of, beach read or airplane read. So a lot of commercial fiction, easy sort of, digestible reading comes out starting from like late spring into like, August, September. So it in the US and the UK, it doesn't really, it's publishing is year round. It's just that submissions are not year round for agents, but publishing is year round. Okay.
Yeah, there's another question by Shahnaz. Why are pub days on Tuesdays? Is there some history to that?
Absolutely. Isn't that it's yes, there is some history to that. There is some market research to that. It's very interesting, but yes, most pub days are Tuesdays. I mean, honestly, Shahnaz, if you Google it, you'll see a lot of great articles and sort of opinions on that.
All right. I did have a question, but I'm blanking out right now. I think there's a lot of questions, but this has been great. I mean, I'm going to wrap it up quickly. Thank you so much, Priya, for making time for this, despite your travel and your schedule and all of that. I appreciate it very much. And your email is going to be there in our thank you email. I have put her website in the chat in case you want to reach out, you want to go and check it out. Just check it out. Yes, I remembered my question. So I wanted to ask you, where can I find a good sample of a query letter? Is Google a good resource for that? It is?
Folks, let me tell you, it's amazing what's out. It's really fantastic. I mean, Google has done all our work. It's just really how much time you have to spend. And it's like, for example, like a site that I would highly recommend is Jane Friedman. She's terrific. And if you haven't already started following her and subscribing to her newsletters, please do so. She is absolutely terrific because, you start at one point and then you sort of, continue your research down that road. So you literally can type in, what is a good example of a query letter? And then you look, and then it'll take you to other sites. And you obviously have to do what works best for you, right? Just because it has to be true to who you are. Just because there is a great query letter out there, it might not represent you. So obviously take notes from that, but make it your own. Because for me, I know immediately when a new writer has done her research or his research about me and why I am a fit for them, right? It really does. I mean, I get a lot of query letters where it's first of all, it's a wrong name, or secondly, it'll be something like, it'll be the right name, but then it'll be so-and-so recommended you. And I'm like, I don't even know who this person is. So like, obviously it's a cut and paste. And by the way, I'm not saying it's bad to do a cut and paste, but when you do a cut and paste or copy paste, just be mindful to change some information on it, right? I mean, there's a sort of basic things, but sometimes as writers, we're in a hurry, we're anxious. So sort of like temper that down and just be really mindful every time you send out a letter. And it is an exhaustive process. But like I said, you just have to stay in the game, and there will be an agent out there for you if it's not now, in 6 months. And by the way, the same thing happens to me when I'm on query. It's not like I get publishing deals right off the bat. Sometimes it takes me 8 months to really sell a book because, it could be a revised resubmit. I come back to the writer and say, let's strategize. What else can we do? Here are all the notes that I've received from the editor. What can we improve? So it's always a work in progress, right? And that's something that you guys have to understand. So don't be frustrated. Again, everything sort of depends on who you are, what your style is. But just keep in mind the very basic fundamentals. Make sure the name of the agent is correct. Make sure your query letter is current. Make sure you have your copyright information clearly marked on your manuscript. I mean, these are all sort of very mechanical but important things to do. So, yeah.
There is one question, Priya. I think we have time for it. Jennifer is asking, how do you know if publishing houses work in various countries as you do? Is there any way to verify?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, I'm going to read it again. How do you know if publishing houses work in various countries as you do? Is there any way to verify?
So, Jennifer, are you asking if the legitimacy of a publishing house, or?
I'm waiting for her to type up.
Okay.
I'm asking on ways to research, she says.
How do I research? She's asking how to research publishers in other countries?
Mm-hmm, because she lives in Canada. So I think that's where she's coming from. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you mean specific? Did you have a query in a specific country or in general, any country? Well, then the best way to do it is if you are writing in English, then you want to be able to get your book published in the English language in, whichever country that you want to query in. Or if you're writing in a non-English language, then that's, you obviously have to know which country. So if you're writing in Spanish, for example, then, where are the Spanish editors and where are the Spanish publishing houses? Well, that's a very comprehensive sort of thing, because Spanish is published in many different countries, Spain, Latin America. So I would say, again, you have to be a reader to really know, obviously previous books that you've read from that particular country will give you a really good insight. And again, just looking at publisher directories that are available online. And in general, just looking at, online research really is the way to go.
She's responding by saying, this speaks to how you were just talking about the writer doing research on the right fit for an agent and publishing house. Yes.
Yeah, I would say more of, as a writer, you should do research on the literary agent rather than a publishing house, because the agent is the one who has to worry about the publishing house, not so much the writer initially, right? And you know, your agent will be able to tell you where to submit, because the agent is going to be submitting the work. So for your intents and purposes, I would say it's more of a agent focused research. I hope that answers the question, Jennifer.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. Okay, I'm going to take that as a closing question. And if Jennifer responds, I'll make sure to read it out to you. Writers Beyond Borders has been such a delight, guys. Thank you for spreading the word, for being here, making the time. I know being on Zoom is hard now. Now that things have opened up and everything, so I really appreciate it. Next month, I'm going to have an editor, Anuja Varghese. She is from Canada, and the program will be on 19th of October. That will also be my last program for Writers Beyond Borders for this year. I'll come back in January 2023. But if you're not on my mailing list, please email me or register through the library website and spread the word. And thank you for being here. Thank you, Priya, if you have anything to add.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you all for tuning in. I know it's kind of an early morning for everyone. I appreciate it. And like Surabhi said, she's shared my website. Contact on my website is contact@lotuslit.com. So all queries should be sent to that email address. Do follow my submission guidelines. And I hope to hear from, some or all of you someday. And keep up the process. And good luck.
Thank you. If you have any further questions, I will be sharing the email. You can send her an email and Priya will answer it when she gets a chance.
Bye, everyone. Thank you
Bye,
again.
everyone. Thank you.